All right, let's jump right in. We are about to unpack one of the most powerful and, honestly, game-changing ideas in the entire history of design. It's a simple little phrase that totally reshaped the world around us. You've definitely heard this one before, right? Form follows function. It pops up everywhere, from design classes to tech keynotes. And it sounds so self-evident, so logical, like it's just a basic law of how things should be. But, and this is where it gets really juicy, what if I told you that the way most of us understand that phrase is a massive oversimplification? Maybe even completely wrong. To really get to the bottom of this, we need to dig in. We've got to trace the story of this incredibly powerful and, as it turns out, pretty controversial idea. So, first things first, before we get to the phrase itself, we have to understand the world it was born into. And that world is architecture, which at its heart is all about the tension between two huge forces. I mean, it's baked right into the word itself. Architecton, chief, builder. You've got the grand artistic vision of the chief, butting up against the hard practical science of the builder. Every single design is this incredible balancing act between art and science. And that constant tug-of-war brings us to a moment in time, the early 20th century, when a revolutionary new movement came along and decided, you know what, let's tip the scales completely over to the side of science and function. So you have a bit of a roadmap. Just think of design history in these big chapters. You have the classical stuff, then boom, you get modernism in the early 1900s, and then the reaction to it, postmodernism. We're zeroing in on that massive shift in the middle. So what kicked off this design earthquake? In a word, technology. The Industrial Revolution suddenly gave us amazing new building blocks, like mass-produced steel and huge panes of glass. Architects looked around and thought, all this old, frilly, decorative stuff, it just doesn't fit our new, fast-paced world anymore. And out of this new world comes the phrase, the mantra, the battle cry for this whole new way of thinking, coined by the American architect Louis Sullivan. Form ever follows function. The idea was simple and radical. A building's purpose, its function, should be the one and only thing that dictates its design. And this really breaks down their whole playbook. It was an entire philosophy. You strip away everything that isn't necessary. You're honest about your materials. If it's concrete, make it look like concrete. The goal was ultimate efficiency, creating these universal, almost cultureless designs that could work anywhere on Earth. Function was absolutely king. And then you had figures like the famous Le Corbusier, who took that idea and just ran with it. I mean, to the absolute extreme. He didn't just design a house. He famously called it a machine for living in. Think about that. Not a home, a machine. Cold, rational, efficient. It was a complete break from everything that came before. Okay, so as you can probably guess, not everyone was thrilled with the idea of living inside a machine. A rebellion was starting to bubble up. And oh, it had its own killer comeback. The feeling started to grow that these super functional, stripped-down buildings, well, they had no soul. They felt sterile, cold, and they just wiped away any sense of place or human spirit. The pendulum had swung way too far. And this slide just lays it all out, right? The two sides of the fight. If the modernist mantra was less is more, the postmodernists fired right back with less is a bore. They rejected that cold efficiency. They wanted meaning, connection to history, and they were not afraid to bring back symbolism and color. The whole point for postmodernists like Robert Venturi was to be rebels. They were intentionally breaking all those rigid modernist rules. They brought back ornamentation, they made references to history, they even put jokes in their buildings. Anything to fight back against that sterile purity. Okay, but here is where our story takes a massive, unexpected turn. We've seen how the modernists took Sullivan's phrase and turned it into a strict rule. We've seen how the postmodernists rejected that rule entirely. But what if they were both wrong about what he meant? You're not going to believe this. Louis Sullivan, the guy who wrote the rule, loved decoration. His own buildings are covered in this incredibly lush, flowing, nature-inspired ornamentation. For him, the rule was about the building's core, its bones, its fundamental shape. That had to come from its function. But he never, ever meant for it to be a total ban on art and beauty, the building's skin. His followers basically took his idea and created a dogma he himself didn't even follow. Okay, so after all that drama, that epic clash of ideas, where do we stand today? What does design look like now after this huge battle between function and meaning?
It's like we've landed in a third chapter, one that kind of blends the best of both worlds. We still demand function, that's the modernist legacy, and we still crave meaning, that's the postmodernist influence. But the big priority today is something new, the total user experience. Seriously, just look at the phone in your hand. It's the perfect example. It is unbelievably functional, but its shape, its materials, the way it feels, that's all about communicating a certain meaning, a feeling of simplicity and quality. And all of it, the form and the function, serves one ultimate goal, making the experience of using it feel intuitive and seamless. That is contemporary design in a nutshell. So why does any of this matter? Why talk about a 100-year-old fight between architects? Because the shockwaves from that battle are still shaping our world every single day. This isn't just some dusty old academic debate. Every time you open an app, sit in a well-designed chair, or walk through a public park, you are living inside the answer to this ongoing conversation between what something does and what it means. And here's the kicker. This conversation is far from over. As we start designing things that aren't even physical, like AI or virtual worlds, these questions get even weirder and more important. What's the form of an algorithm? What's the function of a space in the metaverse? The debate is still raging, and its next chapter is just getting started.